Today is Tuesday, October 9th, 2012, and my name is Audrey Fishman Franklin. I'm interviewing Philip Stern today. The interview is being recorded for the Maria Rogers Oral History Program and the Boulder Jewish Oral History Project, which is a group who would like to get a sense of what Jewish life and the life of Jews were like in the mid-19th century Boulder, what it looked like and how it felt to be Jewish here. We would like to learn about the development of Boulder's first long-term sustainable Jewish community, how the many vital, thriving Jewish institutions we enjoy today were created. And Philip Stern was here during those early days and can help tell that story. The interview is being recorded by Dorothy Cello. Could you first tell us, Bill, when and where you were born?
Yes, Kansas City, Missouri, 1940. But let me back up just one second. Did I hear you say 19th century Jewish history?
I hope I said 20th century.
I
20th
think
century.
I heard 19th century.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I was born then.
Oh, good.
So this interview will be very short.
Well, I'm good.
Okay.
Thanks for
Okay.
correcting that. The
All right.
mid-20th century. And could you tell us where you grew up, where you were born, and where
Yes,
you grew up?
I was born and brought up in the Kansas City area. Lived the first 10 years of my life in the Missouri side, Kansas City, Missouri, and then my parents and us siblings all moved to the Kansas side, not Kansas City, Kansas, but there's an area called Johnson County. That was a rapidly growing area that existed just west of the state line, Missouri state line. And that was the area in a little town, third-class municipality called Countryside, Kansas.
Perfect. Is that?
Quaint.
Yes. Can you briefly describe your family and your neighborhood growing up?
Yes. Active mother and father. Father was involved in the general merchandise warehousing business and had done that from an early age and was quite successful in it. My mother had, before my mother and father were married, been a milliner and did hats and various things involving sewing and working for clothing stores and so forth. And she was a cashier and all those good things, and then she became just a great mother. And so I have a brother who's 4 years older than I am and a sister who's 10 years younger. So a good portion of my growing up life then was on the Kansas side, and I went to a high school there, Shawnee Mission High School, and before that to a grade school that went through the 8th grade called Hickory Grove. None of those places were highly populated with Jews living around the area. I was one of 4 graduating high school that I think nominally were Jewish out of a class of about 650. So we were active in the congregation that existed in Kansas City, Missouri, Congregation Har, not Har HaShem, B'nai Yehuda, and that occupied a portion of our life. But we were brought up. I was brought up as a Reformed Jew and had a good, broad, general knowledge of Judaism, and had been very active in a lot of youth movement, the NIFTY, National Federation of Temple Youth, groups and so forth. And that was important in my growing up, but that was really the only times that I ever was around large numbers of Jewish people.
And when did your parents come to this country? What was their background?
My parents were born in this country. It's their parents that came from Russia. And both of their parents came from Minsk around shortly after 1900. And they were tailors, and they were, I've never known how it happened, but they were immediately sent into the Midwest where there were need for tailors. And so it's an interesting sort of sojourn in the middle portion of this country, where my father was born in Hiawatha, Kansas, Brown County, northeastern Kansas, and then lived into his, I guess, until he was 10 or 11 probably, may have been a little older than that, in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Not places where there were lots of Jews. There were a few merchants and things like that, and then moved to Kansas City. My mother was born in Sioux City, Iowa, again, a small town, and then her parents moved to Kansas City, and that's where my mother and father met, and were married in 1933, and in fact, as an aside, they honeymooned in Estes Park here in Colorado. My father had arranged for one of the trucking lines that hauled the general merchandise at E-Warehouse to basically take them from Kansas City to Denver in one of the big trucks, and then they were picked up by the owner of the truck line and taken then into Estes, and had a wonderful time. So the Colorado ran deep in the blood, but that's sort of the background that existed. In terms of my grandparents, it's one of the great mysteries, as is often the case. We know nothing about my grandparents' history. They did not talk about it. It's not that they refused to talk about it. They didn't talk about it, and the kids never got answers to their questions, and so we know they were from Minsk. Mm-hmm. That's all we know. And here recently I've been trying to see if I can expand that a little. I would love to know that relationship that existed in Minsk, where they were and what the living conditions were like and how horrible it really was. It's the one aspect that I'd like. And it's, at this point, a dead end. So I'll keep working on it.
And what would you say of your parents? What was of central importance to them, do you think, or your family
I think
values?
it was family. There was no doubt that the center was family. They wanted to see that we were educated, that we had proper values, and that we were satisfied with our existence and were protected, perhaps some, from the world around us. I remember, I don't know for my brother and I don't know for my sister, but I know for myself going to grade school, which was in Kansas City, Missouri, and that was a school called Milton Moore, that I was taunted often by young kids of different religious persuasion, and was called Jesus Keller and things of that nature, which as a young person I never could quite understand. And I certainly felt myself very much outside the sort of community that existed at large, because although Kansas City had a fairly good Jewish population, that didn't express itself during those years in much that way. And so I think my parents were there for me, and father was working very hard to earn a proper living to make certain that we all had those things that made us comfortable and whatever. In terms of religious focus, they weren't heavily religious people. Their mothers and fathers had been Orthodox, and they, as kids, had seen some of the orthodoxy and had chosen a less rigorous path, something that seemed to fit for them better into the American lifestyle, as we know, and they passed that along to me then.
So you've hit on much of this, but so how was your Jewishness expressed when growing up, and the part Judaism or being Jewish played in your formative years?
Yeah, well, it was always the sort of thing that I think from day one with religious education, I had trouble believing much of the dogma. It came across to me as a good story. It had warm aspects to it, but in terms of something that I believed a hook, line, and sinker, it wasn't there. But it was the sort of thing that, as I look back on it, it was always the thing, the holidays and the food, and the food, and the food. My mother was a great cook, And she would produce certain things that would leave that wonderful flavor, which we only had once a year. And it was the sort of thing you looked forward to it. And so I've always said here in recent years that I really am a culinary Jew. If one has to pigeonhole me, that's the style. So.
And can you get specific?
Well,
what kinds of things you especially liked?
She would stuff veal breast pocket, and she made wonderful kugels and simises and things of that nature. And I've inherited some of the knack. I do a good percentage of the cooking in our house, and those dishes periodically appear, and she's taught me well. So, good Luxen kugel, good things of that nature, so there was always that. But I don't know what else to say except yum. It's this sort of thing we each grab onto. But those are the things that lingered. Certainly, when I was involved in the nifty National Federation of Temple Youth movement, there was a lot of social value type thing that was going on, and I was very much involved in a general way in that. We would do reenactments of the Scopes trial, and we would do various other things, and I learned a lot from that. And I realized, and again, it's something that it never expressed itself clearly in my mind at that point, but that going to Temple B'nai Yehuda in Kansas City, I at the time knew that I admired very much the rabbi, Samuel S. Mehrberg. And I knew something about him, but as years went by, the sort of gossip and rumor about the man became much clearer, and how he had taken on the city machine, the government machine that was run by Thomas Pendergast. And that was, in the 30s, a major. He was the boss. And he was one of the last bosses. And Kansas Cityans were turning their back. They knew injustices were being done over and over again. But he finally stepped forward and became very vocal on it and urged other people to come forth. I just, to remind myself of this, I went to the internet today and clipped an article on the man. I don't know whether this would come across, but there's a quote that I thought that was sort of important. He said, he was a godly man and all those things, but he said, of all the evil done in the world, 1/3 is due to the vicious people who do it, and 2/3 to the virtuous who let it be done. And I realized that the battles I've fought in my life falls into the matter of trying to make up for the silence that exists with the virtuous ones. And it's gotten me into trouble, and it got me into trouble probably here in this very congregation, and it's followed me through life. But it taught me something, that you don't accomplish it by sitting on your hands. You sometimes have to throw yourself into the public arena, which I've done. I'm pulling out this was the man, Thomas Pendergast, who was the boss of Kansas City. And I mean, it was quite a machine. They owned the concrete industry, they owned lots of things, and there was money passing hands under the counter in all directions. And so it took somebody of the moral character of Mehrberg, Rabbi Mehrberg, to break that. Well, that left a lingering impression. And in the process of going to university and college and so forth, was studying sciences. And often in those curricula, you don't have time for the social and human resource ends. But I was fortunate to have gone to the University of Chicago. And there you do have time. In fact, it's a mandate that you look at the broader picture, and it then became clear to me how this all sort of came into focus. Anyway, enough on that, but I mean, it certainly was something that helped form me.
And the issues that the rabbi took on, or that the that Prendergast, how did it affect, why was the rabbi so concerned? Was he concerned for the Jewish people or all people? Or what?
Yeah, it was affecting everybody. I mean, this went far beyond the Jewish community. It was affecting the entire community. It was graft, and it was the type of governance that was evil, basically. I mean, you were not, it was, things were being done against the causes that you needed. Social welfare was one of those things that was tossed out. There was never time for that. It was, if you wanted something, you had to buy your way into it. And certainly the Jewish community was finding itself very much in the case that Jewish businessmen were outside of this spectrum, and I'm sure that there were lots of hardships, and he had been hearing these for the years, and so that was another reason for stepping in. The congregation later applauded him, but certainly initially they were not totally supportive of his actions. Our rabbi putting himself out in such a perilous position is not something that many people respected. So
now, was and is being Jewish important to you, and why?
Yeah, it's important. It's important from a cultural aspect. It is a warmth that comes from the association and the history that's involved and all of those aspects. Again, it has nothing to do with the religious dogma. I have to say that clearly. It's a matter that a lot of close relationships over the years were with Jewish kindred spirits. And the determination that history shows that existed in terms of perseverance is something that I hold very dear to myself. And so, I mean, it's from those aspects. It's sort of there if I choose to make use of it, is really what it is. It's something to fall back on. So, yeah, I mean, that's about the best I can say about it.
Would you say you followed your parents' style of Judaism, or different? And so,
well, I probably followed my parents' style, and whether they were true believers or not, I have no idea. I don't think it's even relevant sort of information. But there was always a sort of feeling and an association. Now it's like my mother, who is still alive, she'll be 103 in February, still lives by herself, still drives, still is totally independent, still is very healthy, and a wonderful, wonderful person and inspiration. She, has done a lot of charitable things. I think I think the Red Cross has run out of the number of years that they have merit pins that they can give her. I think once you get to be 40 years or something, there isn't anything more than that. But one of the things that she does is she sews with a group at the local Christian church, and she loves this group of people, and they love her, and it's a wonderful association that goes on. At the same time, she goes to the Jewish Community Center in the Kansas City area and exercises twice a week. I've gone to one of those classes with her, and it wore me out, and I, have tried to explain to her when I get a phone call from her after exercise, she says, I'm just absolutely worn out, and I say, I just can't understand why. So I mean, it's great. So I mean, it's something that I think we weren't bound into any specific community. It was something that the broader community was there, and to see the positive aspects of it and how to interrelate with it. And that's always been the case.
And where did you live before you came to Boulder? And then if you could explain how you got to Boulder.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was in Kansas City, went to Chicago for the university, then came back to Lawrence, Kansas for a graduate degree. And so lived in Lawrence, Kansas, and then Topeka, Kansas for a while, and worked for a company, E.I. DuPont, in their film division, at a factory location that was between Lawrence and Topeka, Kansas. And while I lived in that area, there was a small congregation in Lawrence that I would go to. I don't know that you could even be a member of it, but it was a small congregation. I don't think there was a rabbi or anything else. And in some ways it was pretty aloof. I didn't feel too warm and comfortable there, but I would go on occasion, whatever. And then it came time where DuPont was looking at transferring me back east. And I decided I didn't want to go back east. That's not in my blood. And that I'd rather come to Colorado, which is what I had known because with my folks having honeymooned here and my father first in 1927 coming to Estes Park with his mother because of rheumatic fever that he had. It was something that we vacationed out here and it became something that I knew. And I thought, okay, fine, I'm coming to Colorado. And I obtained a job with Ball Brothers Aerospace here in Boulder, and they paid the way, and that's how Boulder came into the picture. And so that actually was in I guess I actually started in 1967, and that's how I ended up here. And it's now become home and has been ever since then.
And did you meet Mary in Colorado, or?
Yes, in Colorado. My wife, Mary, is a Colorado native. Give her a feather. Considering the fact that they're in a minority these days. And in fact, her father and her grandfather were also Colorado natives. So she's recently been looking at her ancestry, and it goes way back. And in some ways, I'm envious, because she can trace it back to the mid-1600s or so. And yet, at the same time, in some ways, I think mine's simpler. What's your ancestry? Started in Minsk, period. What do you know about before that? Nothing. So it makes life a lot simpler. Anyway, I met her in Denver. I was working at that point for Boulder County District Attorney's Office as the head of their environmental section. And I was the Boulder County representative to a 6-county metropolitan consumer fraud office that was operating out of Denver. And so I would go to Denver a few days a week to do the things involving representing Boulder County in this major unit. And Mary was about to go off to paralegal school in Philadelphia and had volunteered for this office. And apparently was having difficulty with a tape recorder that she was trying to listen to. They had recorded what it was she was supposed to do, and so forth. And they all said, ask Phil, he knows how to fix this. So one thing led to several others. Yeah, okay.
Now, did the Jewish community or lack of Jewish community influence your decision to move here?
No. No, it really had nothing to do with it. Although certainly with the knowledge I was coming here, immediately I looked to see whether there was something available. I mean, if I wanted Jewish community, I could go to Denver, and this was Boulder, and it was close enough. So I mean, from my background, that was certainly ample, and I really knew nothing about what was going on in Boulder at that point, and I just sort of walked into the activities that had already been ongoing. And in some ways, I was the latecomer, and I've always felt a little sheepish about it, in the sense that a lot of the activity had been done, and people had raised money and so forth, and then I came in and was on the board and helped out. But certainly there are others that were far more dedicated than anything that I had done. You know.
Now, Phil, are we talking about the fellowship or Har HaShem?
Well, at that point, it's unclear to me, because I think the fellowship had, the building had basically almost been built, and it was, the fellowship had started to become Har HaShem. And so I've always thought of it as Har HaShem.
And how, just for the video, how would you explain the fellowship, the Boulder Jewish Fellowship? Would you
Well,
say?
it was a group of people who wanted some Jewishness, and they had met in their homes and other places and had finally decided that it was time to put together some sort of edifice. And they raised some money amongst themselves and others, and they found an architect who would do it for a very limited amount, and they went about it. And it was sort of a gamble, I think, you know. And certainly over the years it's been a successful gamble if that's how you want to base it, you know. But I mean, it was good, and it was certainly an attempt to satisfy a Jewish need within the community of Boulder, and that was a community that was both, that ranged from extreme Reform to extreme Orthodox. And that's difficult in some ways to put into one room and make it blend. And so some of those memories of mine during those early days were sort of the undercurrents, we could call them the politics of the situation. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And certainly in later years, then groups split off and so forth, which you have the luxury of doing when there are more of you. But at that point, people were really, I think, making compromises and doing a credible job of just making it a across the board Jewish place, period.
And how did you find out about the fellowship or Har HaShem? Do you recall how?
I have absolutely no memory of it.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no memory of it.
But found obviously the group of people who were,
I mean,
around the holidays.
I'm just trying, you know, you asked that question, and it's one that I've never really thought about. There were no Jewish colleagues at Ball Brothers when I came, none. There was, that wouldn't have been that first year, and it was that first year that I joined in. There was a woman who was a published poet who lived down the block from me, but that was in the second year of my being here that I became very good friends with, Florence Becker-Linen. And she figured that, you know, religion for her, she was Jewish, but it was the sort of Jew that it didn't mean a lot. She was into the arts and poetry and so forth. And she thought, though, that any group that could worship a book, the Torah, it had to be all right. And that was, she would repeat that over and over again. So, you know, but that, so I don't know. Maybe there had been some article in the newspaper. Maybe I actually, it could have been that first high holidays that I went searching it out and found something. I mean, I have no idea, because it was very soon after I arrived that I became connected.
And again, what year was that?
67.
67.
Yeah.
And what was it like being Jewish in Boulder then?
Well, you could exercise your Jewishness at the temple, but you really couldn't exercise it anywhere else. I mean, there was no prejudice, but there was no special category, and it was, well, truthfully, it was sort of as I knew it from the years that I had been at various places, other than at the University of Chicago, where there were a lot of Jews, you know. And so it didn't seem that strange to me. It really didn't seem that strange. I mean, you could seek it out. It may be that originally I heard about it. I mean, I had some contacts in Denver when I first came here, and I also, I know, subscribed immediately to the Jewish Chronicle, or whatever it's called, and it could have been in that there was something somewhere. It was described.
And your level of observance then, when you first came? What was?
Well, I certainly was more active at that point. I had few friends at that point. I was pretty much tied to the work I was doing at Ball Brothers and others, and so this was a nice exchange to sort of meet some people and do something a little different. And I was definitely more active, and that's, I was on the board, and so I was here quite frequently. And I know that at the point I was on the board, I think I was in charge of doing some things about maintenance and keeping the building clean and so forth. And in fact, I know that I had hired the young son of the chemist who I'd worked with at Ball Brothers to actually come in and do some of that cleaning and so forth. And I think he worked out just fine. I remember that at one point, and it must have been in those first couple of years, that there had been heavy rains and some flooding, and that the crawl space underneath the sanctuary at that point had gotten water into it, and I think we had to pump it out or something of that nature. I don't remember the details. But so, I mean, there was that sort of involvement. And that involvement intensified and waned back and forth depending upon sort of who the rabbi was, and whether there really was anything inspirational that was going on. I have made a few good friends through congregation members. Rudy and Annette Mannheimer were extraordinarily kind to me, and they were family is what it amounted to. And so there was just a lot of interrelationship that went on there, and I remember that generally. So there was a lot of that. And then sort of things changed. Okay.
And what changed?
What changed was that I first of all got married, and the views of the rabbi at the time was not very open towards intermarriage, and not very open is to put it mildly. From the pulpit or the bima, it was very clear in statements that were made during sermons that my wife wasn't welcome. And if my wife wasn't welcome, I wasn't welcome, as I viewed it. And we stopped coming. And life then refocused, totally refocused, and the temple was nowhere in that picture. And in many ways, that's how it's been then all those years, is that prior to my coming here, I didn't need it. And after that, I didn't need it. I still read the monthly newsletter, and I look to see if there's something that might be entertaining. I look at what the Jewish Community Center is and so forth. And on rare occasion, there's something that we think we would like to do. But admittedly, we live a bit of a distance from here. We're in Allens Park, and that's depends on traffic, but let's say it's an hour. To drive that at 10 o'clock at night, I've reached that point in my life where I don't want to. So it sort of cuts out those sorts of things. You just don't do it. And it means that the temple really is not a focus. Perhaps it will be again at some point in the future. One never knows what life changes may occur, and so forth, but it's something that I've always kept the avenue open. I haven't supported in a big way, but I've kept it open, and I'll attend a high holiday service now and then or something else, but on extraordinarily rare occasion.
Now when you first came, about your social life,
Right.
Did it revolve, was it centered around your Jewish friends, or all people?
No, well, actually, the first woman that I made contact with was the relative of a friend from Kansas City, who happened to be the daughter of the owners of Lakeside Amusement Park in Denver, and Rhoda Krasner. And I say this with some embarrassment. Rhoda didn't have much time to carry on any sort of relationship with anybody, because she was in a sense managing Lakeside Amusement Park. And she was very kind and would invite me down, but she'd say basically, can you come at about 11 p.m.? Okay, and we'll go over to Elitch's and we'll ride the roller coaster. I never was exactly fond of riding roller coasters, and she'd go with a stopwatch to see whether their roller coaster was longer or shorter than Lakeside's roller coaster. So, I mean, there were some interesting times, but it's clear that didn't satisfy. It was going nowhere, is what it amounted to.
So did a lot of your social life, though, center around Denver more than
No, it really
Boulder, or
didn't.
then-
It's centered around Boulder. I made a lot of friends basically outside the Jewish community, and had relationships and good times with people here, basically in the Boulder community.
And again, you
Some were Jewish, some were not. So I mean, we'll leave it at that.
though I think you've alluded to this next question, but what influenced your Jewish activism in Boulder?
Well, I think the activism in my life, because it's not just been in Boulder, but certainly that inspiration of Mehrberg, Rabbi Samuel Mehrberg, was sort of always there. And it's sort of the thing that I think some of that youth group activity with Temple Youth that I was involved in also raised a social conscience. And it's the sort of thing that there are just issues that I think are an injustice and they need to be dealt with. And it's the sort of thing that I see that things don't get done. It's not that I'm impatient, but I see that people don't either have time or think it's trivial, or all they're interested in as the world turns is making money. And we all need something to keep us, to feed us and so forth, but it goes to great extremes. So I became involved, certainly serving in the capacity as a consumer representative to the district attorney's office. I met people of all walks of life, and there were an awful lot of things that were going on, and that influenced me in a number of ways, from fires in government housing projects, from defective materials, insulation in particular, that occurred in Denver, which led me through the district attorney's consumer office, the Denver consolidation, to get that group to petition the Consumer Product Safety Commission in Washington, and we took on the insulation industry nationwide. It was an interesting 10-year span for me that basically worked on it, and regulations were developed in almost every area. It was the sort of thing that if I would go into an insulation plant, the corporation would send along a variety of lawyers and other people to watch me, because they did not want, they weren't sure what they were going to find. But, it was activity like that. And I was also doing some engineering work on myself, for myself, and I had received a couple of Department of Energy Appropriate Technology grants, and to look at the city of Boulder's hydroelectric potential. It's one of the things that I'm most proud of in my entire life. These were minimal grants. They were $10,000 grants to study a major system. In this case, it's Boulder's drinking water system, and see what sort of energy you could get out of it. And what I found was that it's one of the finest projects of its type in the country, in terms of basically the infrastructure was there, and it was a matter of tapping it and producing electricity. And I could not interest anybody. And by the way, from that 10,000, I hired experts and other people to basically do it, and I pocketed a few $100s. That's my total take on this whole project, which today, by the way, if you are out there and looking at the city budget, brings about $2.5 million a year into the city's coffers. Okay. Well, at the time, and this was late 70s, early 80s, there wasn't anybody at City Hall that was interested. The mayor was not interested. The city manager was not interested. The public works director was not interested. Nobody, none of council was interested. There were no other civic organizations or anybody that would have because what basically you have is that organizations have inertia, and inertia takes you that way. And if you're trying to flip it this way, you're out of order. It's the same sort of thing that, in a sense, Mehrberg was doing by trying to, you say, you're out of order. And so I ran for council. I got mad. I ran for council. I got elected. I got elected the 2 terms, and the system got put in.
And can you tell us about that, now that we know the motivation, but you're getting elected and your time on council? And
well, it was a bit contentious, because
What years were you?
it was I was elected in 1981 and retired in 1987. It's council in this community is 9 people elected at large, and a compromise consists of those people that vote one way or the other. It's not a matter of the group being a collegial body where everybody gets together and they find some nice solution. These are people, again, elected at large, and the best representation is if everybody speaks their mind, and in public you hammer it out. And if it's a 5-4 vote, that's a majority. That's how it happens. Well, there is this wonderful tendency that people have to not want to partake of such dialogue because somehow it could be embarrassing. They might say something that will come back to haunt them. And that never bothered me. And it's the sort of thing that council was there, as far as I'm concerned, to grind them down, because they never took one idea that I had, such as the first smoking ordinance, banning it. They thought that was crazy. And they finally extended the courtesy of hanging me out there to see if the sharks ate me. And when I was applauded, then they all jumped on the bandwagon. And this happened over and over again with lots of different types of issues, social issues, other issues. Farmers market, that was one of the things where I was involved in the original establishment of it. Other things. So you
And
just...
what other issues were on the table during that time that would be interesting?
we were dealing with emissions from wood stoves, burning regulations in the city and so forth, and adopted some very strenuous ones in terms of regulations to keep the air clean. Things of that nature. So, I mean, there were just lots of them, but it was the sort of thing you just had to keep fighting it, and it was a tremendous drain of energy. I mean, I was working for myself as an engineering consultant, and I never had time to do my own work because I was fighting these other battles. But you get them done, and you feel it. There's no real room for compromise in a lot of environmental struggles, because any compromise will come back to bite you in the end. And that's not to say that in the end you can't take it in steps. Taking it in steps is not a compromise. It's a matter of proper planning in terms of how you carry out an action. But saying, well, we'll only go a third of the way there and that's it, and we're not going to deal with it anymore. Sorry, it doesn't work. Anyway, so those were entertaining years, and there was one. Actually, I had made comment about. I hesitate to make the comment again, but one of those things was about proper civic responsibility in terms of facilities, in terms of who's going to pay. And we all embrace the arts, and we want to see the best facilities and so forth. But there was that issue, which comes up periodically, about the need for a super facility that would accommodate drama and all the arts in the proper way that we'd all like to see. But it was being done by public increment financing, which meant that if there was any failure in terms of the sales tax to grow, it would start to come out of the city budget. And that was something that it would cost every one of the taxpayers in the community of Boulder a great deal of money in order to subsidize something that supposedly was endowed and supposed to take care of itself. And in this particular event, if I'm not mistaken, it was a $12 million project, which was just far too expensive in the 80s for the type of project that could be. And it was at the time that the Boulder Theater was available for $2 million. And with a good renovation of the Boulder Theater, you would have had 80–90% of what you wanted in an absolutely deluxe facility. And that's one of those things that council put it on the ballot. I was against it, and I fought the issue and was victorious, if you can say victorious. I don't want to be smug about it, but it's the sort of thing that it did cause the art community and others in Boulder to rethink just how one invests their money in a public way that make sense without breaking the bank. And I think that's what we all have to do is, I mean, I realize I'm a bit of a fiscal conservative, but that's exactly what a conservationist is. A conservation conserves. That's an Al Bartlett statement, by the way, for those of you who understand who Al Bartlett, professor of physics at the University of Colorado, is, and that's how I've always viewed it.
So, looking back on your city council career, right. Are your thoughts that you were the start of many many movements and projects that have now come to reality?
No, it's true.
And what is that like for you? What is that?
Well, I have a great feeling of accomplishment. Okay, I mean there is just a thing with knowing the fact that I never had to compromise my value. In that sense, that it was as pure an approach as possible. And keep in mind, we were not paid. We didn't get health insurance. We did get to go to a couple conventions a year. I remember some of those conventions. I sat at one of them with some people from Florida who indicated, they said, well, how much do you make being on council? And I was with another Boulder City councilman, and we both said, no, we don't make anything. We don't earn anything. They'll pay our expenses for coming to the, to a national meeting of council people, but that's it. No. How much do you make? And they were asking, how much do you make under the table? And they said, you're just crazy. He said, we make $50,000 a year. Now this was in the 80s, $50,000 a year. Well, I've always been proud of the fact that Boulder government, both city and county, is absolutely honest and clean. There are occasions it may be stupid, okay? We're all people and we make mistakes, but it's clean. And that's something to embrace, and it's something we always have to remember. I don't agree with them a lot of the time, especially now, I think. These people have very thin skin that are now there, but okay. So be it.
Now tell me, do you think you were one of the first Jewish council people?
I have no.
That would be interesting.
It's very interesting. No, I never researched it. I have no idea. Yeah. Looking back, it may well have been.
Yeah.
I have just no idea. That's a good project for you. Okay.
Now, what changes have you seen from the early days of the establishment of Jewish?
Well, certainly. There are many Jewish establishments in this community, a dizzying array. I was just looking yesterday at a map that showed Boulder Jewish institutions, and it was just cluttered with little, and I went hopping around, some of which I don't even know what they are. I admit I don't have any idea. So I mean, that's new and different, the fact that it's readily available. The fact that I can go to a number of grocery stores and find almost everything I want, although I wish somebody would tell me where I can find some sour salt. I cannot find sour salt. At King Soopers doesn't have it, Lucky's doesn't have it. Help!
What is sour salt?
Sour salt's citric acid. You've got to use it if you're going to make good Jewish food. You need it for sweet sour. You can use a lemon instead, but citric acid is much better.
And what do you think caused the growth of the Jewish population?
Well, I think that Boulder is attractive from the standpoint of the sort of natural setting, the good life. And I think that attracted a lot of people who were saying, I've had it in the big city and I need a change. And this sort of works. And as to whether, I have no idea whether the fact that there was a Jewish community of any type was important or not to them. I don't know. I have no idea. But certainly it has drawn them in. Now, I mean, that's a change. I will say on the negative side, and this is really dealing more with just congregations themselves. Many of them have grown way too big for me. I never was caught up in this business of the constant cycle of raising funds to build bigger edifices. There is something about that which to me takes away from the spirit of the whole of what it is you're trying to do. Okay? To me, One can, if praying is what you want to do, you can do it in a hovel. You know, a nice wooden building with some air leakage is just fine. It embarrasses me to have the riches that are sort of laden and the facilities and the edifices that sit vacant for a good portion of the year. What is the message that's being given? To me, that doesn't track. Okay. Those same congregations tend to have so many people that I can't get to know any of them. If I come to something at Har HaShem, there are too many people. There are too many people, too many strange faces. Yeah, there are a few people I may recognize, but that's about it. And they're clearly of my generation. And you know, I could go to some of these little subgroups and meet some more people. Well, then I might as well just go to the subgroup and forget the master. So I have problems with that. And I think you could probably say that that would be with any group, regardless of whether it was Jewish or Christian or something that had nothing to do with religion. Right. Just in general.
Now, could you tell us about your move to Allens Park, when and
yeah, well,
why you moved to Allens Park?
In 1987, after I retired from council, my wife basically had the choice of where do we want to live. We had a nice cabin up in the Allens Park area, and it was her choice, and she said, let's move to Allens Park. And part of that reason clearly was the fact that as a political person, the spouse or other person becomes a second-class citizen. It's an unfortunate situation is that I became the star and she was there on occasion having to answer at her job or in her workplace or in a restaurant, why did he do that? And she's a person that's unwilling to say, well, you just have to ask him. She would basically try to defend it. And it's difficult sometimes to defend some of my actions, which might not be totally rational. You just never know. Okay, but that really, that grated on her. And so Boulder, and I guess the other thing for both of us, Boulder became more real than real. There is something about not knowing every nut and bolt about where you are. There is still something nice about the mystery. And maybe there are power-hungry people that want to know every workings of everything. I'm not one of them. And when you do start to get that way, then you spend your time, rather than enjoying the nuances, oh my God, you know what happened here or what that. So it was her choice, and we moved to Allens Park. And it was, for me, about a 6-month transition, I have to admit. And Allens Park is, I want to say perhaps it's like any place, small town America, but I'm not sure that it is. I think it's worse. So it's a split community. One part likes one part and one part likes the other, and both parts dislike each other. So, I realized that politics in Boulder was much easier. Much easier.
Interesting. Now, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today?
Well, I brought along with me something which I have to admit I was amused by. This was, when was this? This says 1966 to 1991. So I guess maybe that was in 1991. Is that when that happened? There was a founders gathering. I think it's the first time that I actually recognized Har HaShem. I think it's the first time that I ever was associated with or thought of myself as a founder. I never thought of myself as I just appeared on the scene. I helped out. I did what I did. I don't take any real credit for it. If I did some positive things, great. If I screwed up, my apologies, let's move on, we have the rest of our life to lead. But I've always joked about this. It says Congregation Har HaShem, founder 1966 to 1991. It's a very heavy knife. It must be silver or silver plated because it tarnishes. And it's supposed to be a bread knife, but you can't cut anything with it. I don't know, I've pondered for a number of years what the significance of that is, and I'll leave you with that thought. What does this represent?
Thank you very, very much.
Okay.